Part 1. The Alien Blood. Blood is supposed to be the strongest, most unbreakable bond in the entire world. A simple, white piece of laboratory paper turned my blood into a complete, terrifying lie. My life was wonderfully perfect. I lived in a beautiful home with a kind father, Arthur, and a gentle mother, Helen. My older sister, Evelyn, lived far away in the busy city. I was 20 years old, happily studying biology at the local university. We received a fun class assignment to test our own family DNA. I took a sample of my saliva and a few hairs from my parents' brushes. I expected to see a normal, boring genetic match. The laboratory email arrived on a quiet, sunny Tuesday afternoon. I opened the digital file with a bright, innocent smile. The happy smile vanished instantly from my face. The bright red letters on the screen screamed a terrifying, impossible truth. My genetic match with Arthur and Helen was exactly 0%. I was a complete, biological stranger in my own home. My mind spun in dark, chaotic, and terrifying circles. I ran down to the dusty, cold basement to find my official birth certificate. I needed absolute, undeniable proof. I opened a heavy, forgotten wooden chest hidden in the dark corner of the room. I dug desperately through old winter clothes and broken childhood toys. I did not find any official hospital records. I found a folded, yellowed piece of paper hidden at the very bottom of the chest. It was an old, torn police poster. The bold, black letters announced a missing child from exactly 20 years ago. My hands shook violently as I unfolded the fragile paper. The black and white photograph on the poster was incredibly clear and completely devastating. My heart stopped beating completely. The missing girl in the picture had my exact eyes, my exact nose, and my exact smile. It was like looking into a strange, terrifying mirror from the past. The missing child on the ancient police poster was me. I was not the biological daughter of Arthur and Helen. I was a stolen ghost living in a fake universe. The loving parents who kissed me goodnight were actually strangers keeping a dark secret. The warm house suddenly felt like a cold, dangerous prison. Every happy childhood memory was instantly replaced by a deep, terrifying, and paranoid fear. I sat on the cold basement floor for hours. The yellow poster felt heavy in my shaking hands. My entire identity was a carefully constructed, beautiful illusion. The people I loved most in the world had stolen my real life. The search for the absolute truth had officially begun. Part 2. The Cruel Accusation. A deep, burning anger replaced the love in my broken heart. I spent 3 days secretly investigating the missing child poster. I searched old newspaper archives in the city library. The torn poster belonged to a very wealthy, powerful family who lost their baby girl exactly 2 decades ago. The dark pieces of the puzzle formed a terrifying picture in my mind. Arthur and Helen must have kidnapped me to replace a baby they could not have. They stole me from a life of incredible luxury and wealth. They forced me to live a completely fake, ordinary life. My 20th birthday arrived with a cold, bitter storm. Arthur and Helen baked a beautiful chocolate cake and decorated the living room. They waited for me with warm, loving smiles. But I did not bring joy to the party. I brought the harsh, unforgiving light of absolute justice. I walked into the living room with heavy, determined steps. The bright police lights suddenly flashed outside our front window. Heavy fists knocked loudly on our wooden door. Uniformed officers rushed into the warm house. The birthday celebration was instantly shattered by the cold reality of the law. The police officers quickly placed heavy metal handcuffs on Arthur and Helen. The neighbors watched in pure, silent shock from their windows. I stood in the center of the room, holding the yellow missing poster. I looked at the people who raised me with eyes full of pure hatred. They did not fight the police. They did not scream or demand a lawyer. Arthur simply lowered his head in deep, silent shame. Helen looked at me with eyes overflowing with agonizing, heartbroken tears. There was no anger in her gentle face, only a profound, bottomless ocean of sorrow. A soft, trembling apology for not hiding the dark secret longer slipped from her pale lips. Her quiet words cut through my angry heart like a sharp knife. She did not sound like a cruel, evil kidnapper. She sounded like a desperate mother losing her most precious, beloved child. The police cars drove away, taking my fake parents into the dark night. I stood alone in the empty, quiet house. The beautiful birthday cake sat untouched on the table. The victory of justice felt strangely cold and incredibly hollow. The terrifying journey into the past was just beginning. I packed a small bag and prepared for the upcoming legal battle. I was determined to send them to prison for stealing my real destiny. I wanted my wealthy, biological family back. But the dark shadows of this house held secrets far more complex and terrifying than a simple kidnapping. Part 3. The Desperate Confession. The grand courtroom was freezing and filled with uncomfortable silence. I sat rigidly in the victim's chair, staring blankly at the wooden walls. Arthur and Helen sat across the room in orange prison uniforms. They looked incredibly old, fragile, and completely broken by the heavy weight of the law. The trial began with harsh, aggressive accusations. The prosecutor painted them as cruel, selfish monsters who stole a wealthy child for their own happiness. I expected my fake parents to remain silent or beg for mercy. I expected them to finally admit their terrible, unforgivable crime to the judge. Instead, their defense lawyer stood up with a confident, calm posture. A shocking statement echoed through the large courtroom. The lawyer announced that Arthur and Helen fully admitted I was not their biological daughter. However, they completely, absolutely denied the terrible charge of kidnapping a wealthy baby girl. Arthur took the witness stand with shaking hands. Tears poured freely down his wrinkled face. A desperate, emotional confession filled the quiet room. He swore under oath that they never stole a child from any family. He claimed the story of my arrival was much darker and deeply tragic. 20 years ago, on a freezing winter night, they were walking home through a dangerous, dirty alleyway. A faint, weak crying sound came from a dark corner. They searched the freezing shadows and found a tiny, abandoned newborn baby hidden deep inside a freezing, dirty metal trash can. The baby was wrapped in a thin, torn blanket, slowly freezing to death. Arthur's voice broke with heavy emotion. A desperate explanation followed. They could not have children of their own. Seeing the freezing, abandoned baby felt like a tragic, beautiful miracle. They made a sudden, illegal decision. Instead of calling the authorities, they took the freezing baby home. They warmed the child, fed her, and loved her instantly. They forged fake birth documents to keep the miracle safe. They claimed I was not a stolen princess from a wealthy mansion. I was a discarded, unwanted secret. I listened to this emotional story with a heart full of cold disbelief. It sounded like a cheap, desperate lie designed to reduce their prison sentence. I refused to believe I was trash. The missing poster in the basement was real. Their emotional tears could not hide the truth. I stared at Arthur with fierce, unforgiving eyes. The courtroom murmured with shock and pity, but my mind remained completely locked. I was determined to prove they were lying. I needed to destroy this fake story of a garbage can rescue. I needed to find the absolute, undeniable proof. Part 4. The Memory Gap. The desperate trash can story echoed in my mind like a bad song. I refused to accept it. I needed to completely destroy their fake defense before the trial ended. I decided to visit the exact dirty alleyway Arthur mentioned in his emotional, tearful testimony. I needed real answers. The alley was located in a dangerous, forgotten part of the city. The air smelled like old rain and decay. I walked slowly past broken glass and dark shadows. A strange, desperate hope pushed me forward. I was looking for anyone who might have lived here 2 decades ago. Near the end of the alley, an old, homeless man sat on a broken wooden crate. His face was covered in deep wrinkles and thick dirt. I approached him carefully, offering a warm meal and a crisp, green banknote. A quiet conversation about the deep past quickly began. I asked about a freezing winter night 20 years ago. I asked about an abandoned baby in a metal trash can. The old man's eyes widened with sudden, sharp memory. A raspy confirmation escaped his dry lips. He remembered that terrible, freezing night with absolute, crystal-clear perfection. A wave of shock hit my chest. Arthur was actually telling the truth about finding a baby. But the old man's next words completely shattered everything. A detailed description of the abandoned child followed. The baby left in the freezing trash can that night was definitely, absolutely a little boy. The old man remembered the blue blanket and the small, crying boy clearly. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I was a girl. The baby in the trash can was not me. Arthur and Helen had lied to the judge. They created a fake story to hide something else. Why would they invent a story about a baby boy to cover up my kidnapping? The missing poster from the basement flashed in my mind. They were protecting a secret much darker and more complicated than a simple kidnapping. The entire foundation of the trial was a complete lie. I ran out of the dirty alleyway, my mind spinning with terrifying new theories. They were trying to distract the police from the real truth. But who were they protecting? The answer pointed to the only other person in our fake family. The missing piece of the puzzle was Evelyn. I needed to speak to my older sister immediately. She had completely avoided the trial and refused to answer my phone calls. She was hiding in the busy city, keeping her distance from the explosion of our family. I pulled out my phone, ready to force the truth out. Part 5. The Sisters Return. The phone rang endlessly before a quiet, shaking voice finally answered. A harsh demand for Evelyn to return home immediately left my lips. I threatened to give the police her address if she continued to hide. The line went silent before a terrified, whispered promise to return was made. Evelyn arrived at my hotel room later that evening. She looked incredibly thin, exhausted, and completely terrified. Dark circles framed her fearful eyes. I expected her to defend our parents or offer comfort. Instead, she fell to her knees on the hotel carpet the moment the door closed tightly. A desperate, sobbing plea for mercy filled the quiet room. Evelyn begged me to drop all the criminal charges against Arthur and Helen. She cried wildly, asking me to let the past remain completely buried. Her extreme panic made absolutely no sense for an innocent, distant older sister. A harsh demand for the truth followed. I told her about the old man in the alley and the lie about the baby boy. Evelyn's face turned as white as a pure ghost. Her entire body shook with violent, uncontrollable sobs. A devastating confession finally broke through her tears. A quiet, agonizing admission hung heavily in the air. Evelyn revealed that Arthur and Helen did not kidnap anyone. They did not steal a wealthy baby. A terrifying truth followed. Evelyn confessed that she was the one who brought me into the warm house on that freezing winter night. My heart turned to absolute, freezing ice. Evelyn was the kidnapper. My own sister had stolen me from my real family. Arthur and Helen were simply taking the blame to protect their oldest daughter from a massive prison sentence. They were sacrificing their freedom to save her guilty life. I stepped away from her, feeling pure, blinding disgust. The woman crying on the floor was a dangerous criminal. I had lived my entire life with the monster who ruined my true destiny. A cold, furious promise to send her to prison alongside our fake parents left my lips. Evelyn reached out, trying to hold my hand, but I pulled away violently. I ordered her to leave the hotel room immediately. I promised to force her onto the witness stand the very next morning. The judge needed to hear this dark confession directly from the real kidnapper's mouth. She walked out of the room, her shoulders shaking with silent, heavy tears. The puzzle finally made terrible, logical sense. My fake parents were just loyal shields protecting their criminal daughter. I was completely ready to destroy their entire family in the courtroom the next day. Justice was coming. Part 6. The Truth in Court. The courtroom felt completely different the next morning. The air was thick with intense, nervous anticipation. I sat in my chair with a heart full of cold, solid steel. I watched Evelyn walk slowly toward the wooden witness stand. She looked like a fragile ghost ready to completely shatter. The defense lawyer began the questioning gently. A harsh demand for the absolute truth echoed from the judge. I waited for Evelyn to confess to the kidnapping. I waited for her to admit she stole a wealthy baby 20 years ago. But her testimony took a violently unexpected turn. Evelyn did not confess to a crime. She reached into her coat pocket with trembling fingers. A fragile, yellowed piece of official paper was presented to the judge. It was a secret, hidden birth certificate. A breathless, agonizing silence fell over the large room as the judge read it. Evelyn turned her tearful eyes directly toward me. A heartbreaking, impossible confession broke from her shaking lips. The words destroyed my entire universe in a single second. I was not her kidnapped little sister. The devastating truth was that I was her own biological, absolute, and true daughter. 20 years ago, Evelyn was only 15 years old. A terrifying, violent assault left the young teenager pregnant and completely traumatized. To protect her future and hide the terrible shame, Arthur and Helen orchestrated a massive, brilliant lie. They hid pregnant Evelyn inside the house for 9 long months. When the baby was finally born, Helen faked her own pregnancy to the neighborhood. They legally registered the newborn child as their own youngest daughter. They transformed a traumatized teen mother into an older sister. They transformed themselves into my parents to give me a normal, safe, and happy life. I was not a stolen princess. I had no wealthy family looking for me. I was the hidden, secret blood of this exact family. I carried Evelyn's DNA, which was why the test showed zero match with Arthur and Helen. They were actually my loving, fiercely protective biological grandparents. My mind shattered into a million sharp, painful pieces. The people I put in orange prison uniforms had sacrificed their entire lives, their reputation, and their freedom just to protect me from a dark history. I had blindly destroyed the most loving, selfless family a person could ever have. I fell forward, covering my face with my shaking hands. Heavy, agonizing tears of pure guilt and deep sorrow poured from my eyes. The criminal kidnappers were actually beautiful, tragic heroes. But one massive, terrifying question still burned in my mind. Who is the girl on the missing poster? Part 7. The Mistaken Poster. The courtroom was in a state of absolute, chaotic shock. The judge called for a temporary pause to review the secret birth certificate. I sat in a small, quiet waiting room, unable to stop my heavy, guilty tears. Evelyn sat across from me, her eyes completely exhausted, but finally peaceful. A desperate question about the missing poster finally left my lips. If I was not a kidnapped child, why did I find a police poster with my exact face hidden in the basement? Evelyn looked down at her hands. A soft, sad explanation slowly unraveled the final, confusing mystery. The black and white photograph on the old, yellow poster was not me. A heartbreaking revelation followed. The picture on the poster was actually a photograph of Evelyn herself. It was taken exactly 20 years ago, right before the dark, terrible trauma changed her young life forever. When 15-year-old Evelyn discovered she was pregnant, absolute terror consumed her mind. A frantic, desperate decision to run away from home was made. She disappeared into the dangerous city streets for 2 terrifying weeks. Arthur and Helen were completely devastated. They printed thousands of missing child posters desperately. They searched every dark alley and dangerous corner until they finally found their terrified daughter. They brought her home and created the massive lie to protect her. The poster in the basement was just a painful, leftover memory of those 2 terrible weeks of fear and absolute parental desperation. Because I was her biological daughter, I grew up to look exactly like Evelyn did at 15. The genetic resemblance was incredibly perfect and terrifyingly exact. When I found the poster, I was looking at a ghost of my mother's traumatic past, mistakenly believing it was a picture of myself. The entire kidnapping theory was built on a tragic, impossible misunderstanding. I had used a picture of my mother's deepest pain to send my loving grandparents to prison. A heavy wave of profound, crushing regret washed over my entire body. I had completely ruined everything based on a ghost. I moved across the small room and fell to my knees in front of Evelyn. A desperate, sobbing plea for forgiveness echoed in the quiet space. Evelyn reached out with shaking, gentle hands. A warm, loving embrace finally connected a mother and daughter after 20 years of complete, protective silence. The truth was finally free, but the nightmare was not completely over. A dark, terrifying shadow still hovered over our broken family. If Evelyn was a victim of a violent assault at 15, the monster who hurt her was still out there. The hunt for true justice was just beginning. Part 8. The Abuser's Shadow. The warmth of my mother's embrace could not erase the dark anger growing inside me. The beautiful sacrifice of my grandparents was stained by the actions of a violent monster. A fierce, determined demand for the identity of the man who hurt her 20 years ago left my lips. Evelyn physically shrank back against the wall. Pure, unfiltered terror completely replaced the peace in her eyes. A frantic, shaking refusal to speak his name filled the small room. She whispered that the man was incredibly powerful, dangerous, and completely untouchable. Speaking his name would mean absolute death. Her extreme fear only fueled my burning desire for justice. I needed to know who destroyed her childhood. I left the waiting room and walked quickly to the courthouse archives. A sharp, determined focus guided my hands as I searched through old, public legal records from 20 years ago. I looked for any powerful men connected to my grandfather's old business. I searched for wealthy friends who often visited their home during that specific year. A familiar, terrifying name suddenly appeared in a dusty, forgotten legal file. My blood turned into absolute, freezing ice in my veins. The man who frequently visited their house 20 years ago was a brilliant, rising lawyer. He was a trusted family friend who used his power to silence anyone who opposed him. A shocking realization hit my mind like a violent earthquake. That same man was sitting in our courtroom today. The monster who abused 15-year-old Evelyn was not hiding in the shadows. He was sitting highly and proudly on the wooden bench of justice. The abuser was the supreme judge currently presiding over our entire kidnapping trial. The devil himself was wearing a black robe and holding a gavel. My mind raced with terrifying clarity. The judge had total control over my grandparents' fate. He could easily send them to prison forever to keep his dark secret permanently buried. Evelyn's profound terror finally made perfect, horrifying sense. We were completely trapped in the lion's own dangerous den. I ran back to the waiting room, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. A frantic, whispered warning left my lips as I told Evelyn what I had discovered. Her eyes rolled back in pure, absolute panic. The powerful monster had completely cornered us in his own twisted game of justice. We needed a miracle to escape this nightmare. We needed a weapon powerful enough to destroy a corrupt supreme judge. But the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom suddenly opened. A cold, stern bailiff ordered us to return to our seats. The final, deadly chess match was about to begin. Part 9. The Lamb's Trap. We walked slowly back into the large, freezing courtroom. The Supreme Judge looked down at us from his high wooden bench. His eyes were cold, calculating, and full of dark recognition. He knew that Evelyn had finally spoken the truth. He knew his 20-year-old secret was dangerously close to exploding. A sudden, sharp bang of the wooden gavel echoed loudly. A smooth, completely fake announcement left the judge's lips. He declared a private, emergency meeting in his personal chambers. He ordered Evelyn, myself, Arthur, and Helen to follow him immediately. The courtroom was cleared of all public spectators instantly. We stood nervously inside the luxurious, private office. The judge locked the heavy oak door. His fake, professional mask dropped completely. A cruel, terrifying smile appeared on his face. He pulled a thick, official bank check from his desk drawer. A cold, calculated bribe was placed on the table. A harsh, threatening promise filled the quiet room. The judge offered us millions of dollars to keep the old secret permanently buried. He promised to legally declare me a missing wealthy heiress, giving me a fake, perfect life. If we refused, he promised to send Arthur and Helen to prison forever. He thought we were weak, terrified lambs trapped in his powerful cage. But a sudden, shocking sound broke the tense silence. Arthur began to laugh. It was a loud, confident, and incredibly brave laugh. A calm, fearless declaration left my grandfather's lips, shattering the judge's arrogant, cruel illusion entirely. Arthur revealed that they had recognized the judge from the very beginning. When I first called the police, Arthur and Helen intentionally chose to confess to a fake kidnapping. They deliberately created a massive, highly publicized federal case. They wanted to force a trial under the specific, corrupt judge's jurisdiction. They gladly accepted the handcuffs and the public shame. They used my angry accusation as the perfect, brilliant trap. A shocking revelation followed. They knew Evelyn would finally break her silence in a desperate attempt to save them. They needed her testimony officially recorded on the federal court system. The judge's face turned completely white. A frantic reach for the locked door was abruptly stopped. The heavy oak door crashed open from the outside. Dozens of heavily armed FBI agents rushed into the private office. The entire private conversation had been secretly, perfectly recorded by federal hidden microphones. My brave, brilliant grandparents had sacrificed their own freedom to build a flawless, inescapable trap. They used themselves as bait to catch the untouchable monster who ruined their daughter's life. The arrogant judge was violently pushed against the wall, heavy metal handcuffs locking tightly around his guilty wrists. Part 10. The True Family. The corrupt Supreme Judge was dragged out of the courthouse in complete disgrace. His dark, powerful empire was permanently destroyed by a couple of brave, loving parents. The massive media storm quickly shifted from a fake kidnapping story to the shocking exposure of a horrific 20-year-old political crime. However, the legal system was still incredibly strict. Arthur and Helen were completely cleared of kidnapping, but they still faced serious charges for forging official birth documents 2 decades ago. A tense, final sentencing hearing was scheduled with a new, honest judge to determine their ultimate, legal fate. I stood confidently before the new judge. I refused the legal immunity offered to victims. A strong, passionate defense of my family left my lips. I spoke about their incredible sacrifice, their endless love, and their fierce protection. I demanded that the court recognize their heroic actions above the law. I declared that true family is not defined by perfectly legal documents or simple blood tests. True family is defined by the people who are willing to wear handcuffs and face prison to protect you from the dark. I begged the court to completely forgive the loving grandparents who saved my life. The honest judge listened quietly to my emotional words. A soft, understanding sigh filled the courtroom. A gentle, merciful ruling was finally announced. The judge officially dismissed all criminal charges against Arthur and Helen, citing extreme, mitigating circumstances. The heavy chains of the past were permanently, beautifully broken. We walked out of the courthouse together into the bright, warm sunshine. The heavy, dark secrets were finally gone forever. Arthur and Helen held hands, smiling peacefully for the first time in 20 years. They were no longer terrified prisoners of a powerful monster. They were completely, truly free. I turned to look at Evelyn. She did not look like a fragile, terrified ghost anymore. She stood tall, bathed in the warm light, her eyes shining with quiet strength and deep love. A lifetime of unspoken truth hovered softly in the gentle space between us. I reached out and wrapped my arms tightly around her. A single, beautiful word finally left my lips. I called her Mom. Evelyn cried tears of absolute, pure joy, hugging me back with all her strength. The fake sister was gone, replaced by a brave, wonderful mother. We walked away from the courthouse as a real, honest family. The missing poster and the fake birth certificate were just ashes in the wind. We did not need perfect DNA or flawless legal papers. We had a bond forged in fierce protection and unconditional, endless love.